In her first life, the renowned and genius surgeon Dr. Aoi Takamoto was Elise de Clorance, a villainess of noble descent. Elise's selfishness, insolence, and obsessive love for her fiancé Prince Linden de Romanoff led to the deaths of her family members and, eventually, herself. Only after being reborn did Elise realize the error of her ways and decide that, instead of ruining lives, she would devote herself to saving them. But a tragic airplane crash robs her of her dreams too soon. By a miracle, Elise wakes up in her original body before her official engagement to Linden. Recognizing the chance to cherish her loving family and free Linden from an unwanted marriage, Elise wishes to use her advanced medical knowledge to continue down the path of saving lives. In a deal with the Emperor, Elise is given only 6 months to prove that her true place is not on the throne, but rather with the wounded and ailing who desperately need her help. Elise de Clorance arrives with her family to witness the huge gathering of those looking to honor the magnanimous Emperor. As the Clorance family walks through, the people comment on Elise's beauty and splendor. Except for one woman who isn't too happy. The festivities comments and Elise finds herself all alone amongst the crowd, even though the rest of her family seems to fit in just fine. But the only thing that's bothering her is that she wants to go home to study, with the physician's exam date approaching soon. Unfortunately for her, though, attending the Emperor's birthday celebration is a duty for a noble family member. She then becomes alerted that he might be here too. Mikhail, in her first life, he was her only friend, even though her husband Linden would anger her with his lack of acknowledgement. Mikhail would always comfort her. Clashes with other countries aren't the only conflict in the empire. There's the imperial family's faction, which is led by her father, Duke Clorance, and the opposing nobles faction, which supports the third prince, led by the House of Child. In a pretentious tone, we hear Julian de Child say, "It's been some time, hasn't it?" Lady Clorance, Elise remembers now that since their families are from opposing factions, the two had never gotten along, always having fought like cats and dogs. But the biggest reason they clashed being they both had passionate feelings for Crown Prince Linden. Thinking back on it though, there was really no good reason for the two of them to fight. Julian gets in Elise's face, asking why she's in a daze, so she makes an excuse that she was just remembering a few things in the past. Because of course she can't explain she was both reincarnated and isekai'd with all of her memories from a previous timeline. Julian wonders if Elise was thinking about the time she had put a frog in her desk, or maybe at last year's feast when Elise threw Julian's shoes into the pond, or maybe when Elise accidentally spilled tea all over Julian because she saw a bug. Now remembering just how horrible she was to Julian, Elise apologized with a deep sense of remorse. But the sight of Elise bowing really threw Julian off, making her wonder where this was coming from or if this was some kind of prank. However, Elise, with her head lowered, tells Julian this is no prank. She's realized how bad her behavior has been. Julian breathes a sigh and tells Elise to raise her head, even giving a somewhat endearing look. She mentions Elise seems different somehow. Then they hear one of the knights announce the arrival of Crown Prince Linden, and the people are surprised he's here on time since the prince isn't fond of celebrations. Linden looks amongst the crowd until he spots Elise, and she wonders if he's looking at her. No, in her mind, there's no way he could ever be looking in her direction. However, Julian, with hands on heart and face flushed, believes the prince to be staring at her. She then starts to fall over, as if just being over-dramatic. But Elise checks her head and can tell she actually has a terrible fever. Elise asks Julian to lie down. However, Julian reminds her that it's a noble's duty to attend the Emperor's birthday celebration, but also she wouldn't trade her time near the prince for anything in the world. Elise knows that, unfortunately, because of Julian's political position, there's a chasm between her and the prince deeper than between Romeo and Juliet. But even with her family leading the enemy faction, Julian still cares deeply for the prince. Julian as a person is both earnest and noble, someone that Elise believes would be worthy of being crown princess and eventually the empress. Chris suddenly appears to tell Elise she shouldn't be interacting with the daughter of the child house and takes her away, all while onlookers gawk at Elise, something that pisses Linden off. Lynn picks up on Linden's sudden displeasure, But he denies anything being wrong. Len keeps pressing on the matter, which makes Linden wonder if being dense runs in their family. Linden then spots Elise watching Julian get pulled away and comes to the conclusion that Elise must be interested in dancing. However, she's actually just worried about Julian falling apart since she's sick. However, he's not the only man who wants to get close to Elise, as a few boys swarm around her for their chance to dance. Elise knows refusing without a particular reason would be considered disrespectful, so she reluctantly goes to accept one of them for a dance, but Linden comes in to stop it and asks her to dance, stealing her right in front of them, something she wasn't expecting. As they move on the floor, Elise asks Linden why he invited her to dance, since he'd never really given her much consideration before. She has no idea he was patient Ron during his previous visits, or how his feelings have changed. So when he answered, it was just on a whim. In her mind, she gets disappointed, because of course, His Highness would never actually want to dance with her. All this while he's getting shy and telling her he's glad to have helped her get away from those guys, and the people stare and comment about how the two move so perfectly together. They heard that the prince's fiancé is supposed to be announced today, and came to the conclusion, yes, it must be Elise. Elise remembers in the past where she had to practice feverishly to keep up with the prince's lead during dance. The first time she had danced with Linden, not being able to follow his lead was both embarrassing and frustrating for her. She would often practice so much that her feet would swell all the time. She felt it ironic that she'd finally used those skills today. Our mind then wanders back to the state of Julian Child, concerned for her health. Linden picks up on that. She keeps looking at Julian, so he dances while slowly inching toward Julian and her dance partner. After Julian finishes her dance, she begins to collapse, and Elise catches her, scolding her for pushing herself too far even though she has a fever, telling her to go home and rest. But Julian refuses because being absent from the Emperor's birthday celebration would damage her family's honor, so Linden interjects to tell the girls to come with him. And Julian gets so excited to follow her crush. He leads the two to the lounge where the imperial family normally rests. Julian doesn't want to impose, however Linden explains that if it's a noble's duty to attend birthday celebrations, then it's the imperial family's duty to help them when in need. Julian takes her rest, and outside the door, Elise tells Linden she'd like to stay with Julian because she'd like to look after her. Linden remarks that Elise seems to be like that with everyone, and his comment makes her a little puzzled on what he means. But he just takes off without explaining anything. Elise checks Julian's condition, and good news, she seems to be breathing more evenly. Then a woman comes in to alert them. It's time for Emperor Minchester's celebratory address. Elise remembers this older woman. She's Duchess Harbour, who's from a great noble house in the west that's blood-related to the imperial family. The Duchess tells Elise she should head to the hall, but when her legs begin aching, Elise catches on to the pain the Duchess is experiencing. As Duchess Harbour leaves, Elise suspects she could have Parkinson's disease, a disease where nerve cells begin to degenerate and cause decreased motor function throughout the body. In her past life, she remembers the Duchess losing her life when food becomes lodged in her respiratory tract. However, the time to deal with that isn't now, because Julian has awakened. Elise escorts her to the hall, commenting that it's wonderful they'll make it back in time for the Emperor's address. Julian must be so resilient because of her good daily habits. Julian gets a little flushed and thanks Elise for everything, but Elise's kind heart genuinely thinks nothing of it. She was just doing all she could. Things are sure different than Elise's past life, because Julian would love to get together with her for tea sometime. The people wait in anticipation as Emperor Minchester arrives. He praises them for their incredible loyalty and all that kingly stuff. But getting to the meat of things, he has an important announcement in regards to Linden's fiancé. He regrettably informs the people the lady they have chosen is not of age yet, and Elise stares nervously as she's in disbelief that they'd announce her engagement with Linden with her wager against the Emperor still going. The Emperor explains to the people that while there's nothing wrong with this lady not being of age yet, he does have a personal promise to them. And so the official announcement will come after Elise has come of age. The people begin to talk. After hearing the sound of Elise's name, She has no idea what's going on, or why the Emperor would say her name to everyone. I mean, what's the point of this and not just officially announcing their betrothal? Julian certainly looks crushed. But with that, Emperor Minchester tells everyone to continue enjoying the festivities, and takes his leave. Julian nearly faints again, but is luckily caught by Prince Mikhail, who tells her to keep his appearance quiet, as he's here secretly. With a devious tone, he remarks, "So, that's the girl who will become my big brother's fiancé, is it?" All while Elise freaks out, having PTSD over the terror she experienced in her first life, standing depressed, knowing she may suffer the same fate all over again with her engagement to Linden basically announced. As Minchester and Bent walk together, Minchester tells Bent to bring Elise to him, and feels bad for having her go through this ordeal, but he wants to answer any questions she might have. The Emperor and Elise sit across from each other, with Elise sulking. She wonders what happened to their wager, a wager that was to last until she came of age. She should still have time. Minchester confirms the wager is definitely still on, which gets her staring in surprise. But the kind Emperor wouldn't break any promises. That's why there's no formal announcement, so if Elise wins, he can still withdraw what he said. Elise is concerned for the Emperor's reputation, but Bent assures her there's nothing to worry about. However, he doubts she'll be able to achieve proving her value as a doctor will ever exceed her value as an empress. Minchester thinks of Elise as if she's his own daughter. He respects her determination, but in truth he wants her to marry and support Linden, which is part of the reason why he announced things this way. She wonders why the Emperor cares for her so dearly. Is it because her father is an important friend to him, or because of how she acted the other day? However, she can only stare in shock as the king asks her if she wants to put an end to their wager. Oh man, she's in a tough spot, with the king asking her like this. I don't think she'll give up being a doctor though. After all, the show is called Dr. Elise. She wonders why the Emperor cares for her so dearly. Is it because her father is an important friend to him, or because of how she acted the other day? However, she can only stare in shock. Emperor Minchester remarks, "This country has many outstanding doctors, doesn't it? But you are the only one who can become its empress." Elise looks saddened, as the Emperor has her way the importance of becoming empress more than becoming a doctor. He reminds her she can be with his son, like she always wanted, and they can dance all they want as gracefully as they did earlier. He pleads for her to reconsider. She knows the gravity of what the king is saying, but even so, she still has no intention of ending the wager here. Palace watches Elise as she continues to study diligently for the medical exam. Her brother Chris enters her room to check on her, and even with her best efforts, Chris thinks she's pushing herself too hard, especially knowing the birthday celebrations are still continuing tomorrow. Chris urges her to sleep because she'll have an early morning tomorrow. But even though she's serious about continuing, Chris is just as serious about her sleeping. The next day at the festivities, Elise gets surrounded by several nobles, congratulating her on her engagement to Prince Linden. But she isn't too excited about it. She looks up to check for Julian, asking the others about her, but no one has seen Lady Child. Elise knows with Julian being in love with Linden, the announcement must have surprised her. I think that's more than surprising, knowing the two of you had just become friends. But Elise feels remorse and wants to explain things properly to Julian. We suddenly hear silverware drop to the ground, a man calling for a doctor, a woman had filet. It's Duchess Harbour, the woman that Elise says to have Parkinson's disease. Elise runs over, noticing the Duchess choking with the food lodged in her throat. Elise collects herself, rationally thinking about her next move. She tries to awaken the Duchess, only to see she's fallen unconscious and exhibiting cyanosis, a bluish discoloration of the skin resulting from the inadequate oxygenation of her blood. Elise starts to perform the Heimlich maneuver, but it just isn't working, so there's only one method left for her to use. Luckily, Elise always carries alcohol-based antiseptic with her at all times, usually to prevent infections. She takes a dining knife and pours the antiseptic over it. Someone shouts at Elise, asking what she's doing. But she beckons no one to interfere, so that the Duchess has a chance to survive. She points the blade, promising everyone she can save the Duchess. She plans to make an incision on the neck, to secure an airway, a task that must be done within 30 seconds. She locks in and cuts. Good, she can barely see the food lodged in. She takes a straw and plants it in the Duchess's neck, now allowing her to breathe, even knocked out. Elise is relieved everything worked out. However, everyone is staring flabbergasted. She knows there isn't any precedent of performing a tracheotomy in this world, so this is likely to become a serious matter. The knights come over to escort Elise for interrogation. She accepts, however. She wants them to also deliver a message, because this was urgent. She didn't have the chance to move Duchess Harbor over to an operating room for this treatment. So disinfection wasn't performed under ideal circumstances, meaning there's still risk of infection. She needs the staff at Imperial Cross Hospital to disinfect the Duchess's neck again. The knights could only react to the strange amount of knowledge leaving Elise's lips, but they accepted her request. They then escort her out, and we see Prince Mikhail was observing her the entire time. Sir Bent reports that Duchess Harbor was saved from death's door, and the king acknowledges they must once again give their thanks to Elise. For now, though, she's been placed in the Hundreds household, as they don't want to put her in a jail cell, but she needs to be placed somewhere. Bent is concerned about the outcome of this, because Elise's reputation as a doctor will certainly increase. Well, of course it would. She saved someone who is part of the imperial family, which would unfortunately for them support public opinion for her to become a doctor. Sir Ben suggests they counter this by having someone find in the way Elise performed the procedure, especially using an eating utensil to cut. They can confine Elise to the Hundreds house, making her unable to take the medical exams. The Emperor condones this plan and orders Bent to summon their nation's finest doctors in hopes of finding this flaw. In the Hundreds house, Chris shouts at Elise, scolding her for the brash actions she took. And even though she apologizes, Chris doesn't believe her because she cut the Duchess's neck, something that would have normally put her in prison. Chris asks her if something like this would happen again. What would she do? Well, as our Dr. Villainess, if there's a patient in front of her, she will save them. Chris is ready to scold her further, making Elise a little scared. However, Lenny approaches more tactfully, saying he and Chris understands she acted in a way to save the Duchess, and that anyone would praise her giving medical treatment as an act of bravery. But Chris won't stop his scolding screams, saying that saving the Duchess isn't a good enough reason to endanger herself, with Chris scolding her and Len praising her. This seems to be the opposite of how things would normally turn out for Elise. Elise continues her medical exam studies into the night, getting exhausted over all the texts she still needs to read. She eventually falls to her desk, into a slumber. She dreams about a time Mikhail had something to tell her, but never got his words out, only saying for her to take care of herself as he disappeared. And we see her crying in her sleep utter the words, "No, please, you can't die." As we see, it was Prince Linden who tucked her in. He had heard she was taken into custody, so he came to check on her, but wonders what kind of dream could she be having to cry like this. She turns over in tears, and he thinks, "Don't cry. When I see you suffering, I don't know why, but something in my chest tightens. It's a pain enough to make him break his vow never to return to this tower of blood." He wipes Elise's tears and wishes for her to dream of pleasant things. But as he takes his leave, we see Mikhail, deviously saying he's never seen his older brother like this. Mikhail watches her from afar, noting the interest his brother has taken in her, thinking it's time for him to go tease her a little. With Elise lost in thought, Mikhail suddenly appears to ask what she's reading. She jolts in surprise, and Prince Mikhail apologizes, especially since this is the first time they've spoken. He introduces himself as the third prince, Mikhail de Romanoff, but wonders if he should have shown himself since he's Linden's political rival. He wonders what she'll do, if she's dumbfounded in shock. However, he's in more shock to see Elise crying, saying, "Mill, is that really you?" He wonders how she could know his nickname. She apologizes, saying not to mind her, and formally introduces herself. Mikhail doesn't understand, but when seeing Elise, he senses a sorrow within her eyes. He'll be taking his leave, but he'll see her around, since he's also locked in here for stealing some of his father's drinks during the birthday celebration. so he's being confined to reflect on his actions, but Elise doesn't buy that he feels sorry at all. In Manchester's throne room, he has Doctors Viscount Venn and Graham give their reports, with the Emperor and Bent astonished to hear Elise's surgery to be perfection. Venn exclaims he was excited to see this treatment that was so dangerous no one else had been able to test it, but Elise's medical skills seemed to transcend above all current medical professionals in the nation. Emperor Manchester wonders if this was just a fluke. However, Venn was only more excited to say, after reading her medical report, that the positioning and method of the incision was optimal and described very precisely, all while Manchester and Bent are losing it. As Viscount Venn tells the two, her work needs to be published as a treatise to advance the current level of medical science. Manchester thinks Venn is off his rocker, so he asks Graham's opinion on this, only for him to confirm Elise is an absolute genius, something he'd willingly stake his reputation on. The Emperor can tell he's lost, so he orders Bent to release the girl, with Venn getting even more excited because he's been allowed to speak with her about her skill set. We see Elise continuing her studies, only for Mikhail to barge in. He's bored because he wants someone to play with, and when he picks up her complicated book, she explains she needs to pass her medical exam and become a doctor. Mikhail remarks that with her becoming a doctor, she wouldn't marry his brother, would she? And with a hint of sadness, she simply answers she has no intention of marrying Linden. So with that, Mikhail invites her for sweets, something that Elise gulps at because there's no way she could turn them down. But Elise, since she's too busy studying, Mikhail supposes she can't hang with him. So she bashfully tells him okay, just for a little while. They enjoy a variety of sweets and drinks that Mikhail stole from his father. Elise scolds him, saying it isn't good for him to steal, because if he keeps doing that, he'll never be able to leave this place. He smoothly replies, if that means living here with you, Elise, then that wouldn't be so bad. But Elise brushes this offer, since he says that to all the girls he speaks to. Then he laughs with embarrassment, wondering whatever does she mean. Oh man, he's a total playboy. The two then have a toast, and this brings back memories for Elise. They used to toast like this all the time in her first life, but unfortunately, she wasn't able to prevent his death. She knows with he and Linden both being princes, only one can become emperor, and that the pursuit of the throne is ultimately what will kill Mikhail. Mikhail asks her what's wrong, since she always looks sad looking at him. It's like she's experienced this all before, which gets Elise shocked hearing him say that, but he just laughs because it was a joke. He notes that she seems different, especially casting aside the position of empress to become a doctor. He asks if she hates Linden. She assures him she doesn't, then asks Mikhail about his sword skills. Even knowing he's traveled to other countries to train as a warrior, Mikhail says the rumors are true and doesn't believe anyone could best him in swordsmanship. Elise asks why he trained in the way of the sword, since as an imperial family member, he shouldn't need to defend himself. So he kindly answers, it's because he loves swordsmanship. This is the same for Elise and becoming a doctor. At first, she chose it to atone for the mistakes of her first life, but now she wants to spend her life carrying out the work of a doctor. Even knowing Emperor Manchester wants her to marry Linden and become empress, if she were forced into that path, she'd be a bird locked in a cage, unable to pursue her passions. This is why she must win her wager. After she knocks out, Mikhail carries her to bed and tucks her in. He sighs, because if he was Linden, he'd treat Elise with much more care. He gives her a light kiss on the forehead and takes his leave for the night as he has to be somewhere tomorrow. The next day, Viscount Venn and Graham arrive at the Hundred's house. And Graham thinks, based on the report he read, Elise's abilities must be equal to Rose's, AOO. I just remembered these two don't know Elise is Rose yet. Elise awakens to hear a knock on the door, and those two are surprised to see Rose here. With Elise at a loss for words, we'll have to see what happens next week. So subscribe to my channel for that. I know, I hate cliffhangers, but we gotta wait until next week for the new episode. Watch this next video in the meantime. But hey, it's me, Comfy T. I'll see you all in the next one.